may be the one which is connected here, and therefore maybe it is simply fine. So one thing I can do additionally, I take it off and let's see what then the behavior of our circuit is. If it is fine, great. If not, we are definitely running out of budget. Okay, I have the little diode here on my test fixture, and yeah, when we test now here the little diode, what we can see is that one side of the diode, so one diode is open, so it is only one diode working, so, and that means one is definitely faulty. So I don't know if that is the reason why our radio will not receive, but it is a kind of odd that you still can see it here on the board, that we had here our dual pack in, so you still see where this dual pack was sitting, and yeah, once again, it is a kind of odd, and I really don't know if one side of this dual pack is open, if that is the reason why the circuit doesn't work, considering that this must be a modification, a kind of modification, because otherwise it wouldn't sit here on hook here of these both components, and if they would have forgotten it when they planned here the PCB, well, then we would see it in the schematic, but we don't. So that must be something what has been later added to the radio. Alright, so PCB is back, and you hear static. The radio is connected to our tester, and you see we are feeding minus 70 dBm, and that clearly means it still does not receive. Even we found here our little diode over there, which is not working correctly, but you see we would really need to go deeper, but as I said now several times, we have to cut here, so we cannot go ahead. So that's a bit of a shame, but it is sure that we need additional components, we need additional time, simply for preparing testing. You have seen I cannot easily flip here the board over, that I can test from underneath, so that all would mean I don't know, another hour or even a bit more, and that is now the point where we have to stop. I mean, we saw a little bit of fixing here our final stage, so final stage is working, so that might have been interesting as well, but now we still have our VHF receive issue. But yeah, sorry guys, I really have to stop here. I load it up because that is what sometimes happens as well. So yeah, so it is, that is life, and as I told you, radios like this, I mean, this is a twin band radio, and you know that we can get a quad band radio for 250, 260 bucks or so from TYT, and therefore it does not make any sense to go ahead with this radio. Okay, hope it was still a bit interesting, and thanks for watching, and catch you next time. Bye. Hi and welcome to another episode of TRX Bench. Well, today I have here a Yaesu FT7900. So that is a VHF radio, and it simply will not fire up. So I have literally not more informations. So let's simply connect it to the power supply and see how it reacts, and then let's see what we can do. So that is all we know up to now. Okay, so our radio is connected so far into our diagram to find a point where we can start. And okay, as always, let's start with our block diagram. And most important for us is, of course, how the front panel and the radio itself communicate to each other. And what we easily can see here, that we have, of course, our CPU in the radio, and we have the front end CPU, which is this here, and down here we have our radio CPU, or main CPU, if you will. And then we have the usual or the well-known communication. So it is a serial communication, and you can easily see it here. So we have a transmit line and we have a receive line. So that is the way how the front panel or the front end CPU is communicating with the main CPU. And well, what we can see else, that we have here the power button, which is directly connected to the main CPU, and once started the process that we want to fire up the radio, it tries to get the radio alive. So that means the question is now, is it a communication issue we are facing here, or is it something different? So maybe do we really get here our power supply for our front end CPU, or is it really maybe the wiring here between front end and the radio? I mean, it is at least a radio which is installed in a car, and maybe that we have a problem with the communication line between here our panel and our radio itself, because this is I guess a 3-meter long wire, and maybe that something is wrong with the wire. So that is something what very often happens. So that is of course our main interest, to see if maybe something is wrong with the wiring. So that is the first we want to look after, and then do we have here our 9-volt power supply for our front end panel. When I press here our button, the radio tries to start up, but it doesn't work. So that is still the same question. Is there a problem with here our communication, right? And you see it is really a long wire. And secondly, we of course have the question, is there maybe something wrong with here our voltage supply in our in our front panel. So that is the same approach. So let's see what's going on. Alright, and lucky I am. So I have here a short test wire. So this is really for car installation, and so the easiest way, of course, is to connect here a short wire where we are sure that it is working. So let me connect this both wires, and let's see if this is doing the trick. Nope, it is not the wire, obviously. So then our next step will be testing for the 9 volt. Okay, and here is our panel unit, and yeah, we have seen that the connection wire between the panel unit and the main unit was obviously not the problem. So let's concentrate on the panel unit, and yeah, let me zoom in. And yeah, as you already discussed, we have here our 9 volt, and we want to see on which test point we can find it. So it is here, alright, 9 volt, and it is the test point 2001. So let me enlarge it a bit more. Maybe you are not really able to see it, but I guess now it is much better. So our 9 volt should be present at test point 2001, and of course tested against ground. So let's go down to the radio, or no, first we have to see where we find our test point 2001, and therefore here we find a lot of our test points. Yeah, and we are looking for test point 2001, and yeah, we have it here. So here is our 2001, and at that test point we should see our 9 volt. So let's go first for that. I cracked open both, and first of all, yeah, I have connected here my wire to ground. And let me check if ground is present here at the panel unit. So let's check it here. Yeah, and you can hear it. Ground is present, so we can leave our ground wire down here, and now we can switch the meter to DC, and then we can go for our 2001, and if we go down here, so we should find it down here. Yeah, but let me reposition the camera that we can all see what's going on. Okay, so it should be fine. We all can see our voltmeter, and yeah, so let me go down. Radio is connected to the power supply. Let me first go down here just for checking, and you see 13.8. that means all is fine, and the radio really gets our 13.8 volt, but that is no question, because we have seen that the radio tried to get in connection with the panel unit. Alright, so let's go down here to the test point, and there is definitely nothing. Okay, so let me try to start the radio. Check if you can see it. Yeah. Let me try to start the radio while I'm probing here my 9-volt test point. Okay. So what we see is that while we are trying to fire the radio up, the 9-volt is coming through. Alright? So that means it is obviously not our 9-volt supply, so that is not the problem. So we need to go ahead and see how we can probe forward. Okay, and since the front end processor is working with 5-volt, there is a little voltage regulator here on the board, which is this little part here. And of course we need to check if we have the 5-volt at the output. So once again, let's first check the input, and now I try to start the radio, and we see 8.9, and that is exactly what we expect. And now at the output we should see our 5-volt. Let's see, and 4.9, so that is just fine. So that means that obviously our front end voltages are fine. So I mean, we still do not know if the reset pulse is fine and such, but I think it is important to have a deeper look onto the main board, where we have our voltage distribution, which we should to investigate a little bit more. Yeah, and we are looking here at the main board, and well, you see that here our 13.8 supply voltage is entering the main board, and we have here all our voltage regulators, all the different voltages we have. So for instance, which one is it? So this one here is our 9-volt supply, and if we follow here along, we see that definitely this here is 9-volt, which goes over to the panel board, and of course there are additional voltages. Here we have a 5-volt supply, and here is a 4.98 whatever supply. More down here, so this here is a 5-volt supply as well, which is finally supplying here the voltage to the processor. So that is what we want to look after at the next step, just to be sure that there is not something wrong. I just want to make sure that the voltages are all given, not that at the end maybe one important voltage is missing, and that might be the issue why the processor is directly shutting down again. And therefore let's look into that. Yeah, and unfortunately we do not have all our components for voltage supply. All the different voltages are not all here on the A side of our main board. So some important parts are, as always, on the B side, and that again means we need to take out the board to get access to the B side, and then we can go and check all the different voltages and all the different supply lines and so forth and so forth. So let me take the board out first. Okay, before we go ahead with any further voltage measurements, I just want to make sure that finally the reset circuit is working, because we know that if a CPU does not get a reset, then everything can be really weird, and therefore first let's check if the reset is working. So well, let me see that we have here our information. So you see here we get our one moment, you can't see it. One moment. Okay, here we have our 13.8 volts, so that is where the voltage is coming in, and we see that this here, our 5 volt regulator, you see at the output we have 5 volt, or we should have 5 volt, which is a permanent supply for our main CPU, right? And that is needed because if there is no voltage present at the processor, then of course if we press our on button, nothing would happen. So we need a permanent voltage at the processor, so that is this 5 volt, okay? And additional to that, we have here with all these components, we have our reset circuit. So what does it mean? If our voltage regulator comes up and we will see 5 volt, so that is what we would expect, then of course our reset circuit should show for some milliseconds, 10, 20, 30, I don't know, we should see, of course, here our reset pulse, right? And after the reset pulse was coming up, then of course you see we should then have here 4.95 volt as well. But for the moment where we really get our reset here from our Q1050, this here will be switched on, and we get ground for this I don't know, 20, 30, 40 milliseconds. So that is what I want to check if this is working just as it should. Yeah, and I've done it, so it is a little bit tricky to hold the probes, but you can see what has happened. So this here is of course our 5 volt CPU power supply, and it is set to 2 volt per division, so that means 2, 4, so as you can see it is approximately 5 volt, and you see voltage is rising after I press my or no, not I press my button. So if I connect my power supply to the radio, right? So as I said, we need our permanent 5 volt, and you see directly after I have connected it to my power supply, you see the rising voltage up to 5 volt. In the same time frame, you see here the voltage at our reset point, and you see the voltage is rising as well in the same manner as what we can see here for our 5 volt power regulator, right? And then you see it is dropping, and scope is set to 10 milliseconds, so that means I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, approximately 50 milliseconds we have a low, and then it is going up as well. So while we have already our 5 volt present at our microprocessor, we have here our reset pulse, and that means reset at the main processor is working just fine, as well our power supply, our 5 volt for supplying our CPU with the needed voltage. So everything is fine, no problem with that. So now we have to go ahead. Okay, and well, obviously I had some problems with my SD card, so I lost some already recorded content, and so we are a bit far ahead from the point where I have the last recording. So yeah, sorry for that. Don't know what really happened, but yeah. Anyways, so we are really coming into the right direction. So you see that I have here, as you can see, a resistor, and you see I have a resistor over there. And so I'm already at the point where, and you can see it, we are really at the point where we are able to start the radio. Nothing done additionally, so I do not know if it is really receiving. We only hear the static. But anyways, let me tell you the story, what has happened so far. Yeah, for that, let us have a look here into our schematic. And as we discussed earlier here in the video, we really tested all the voltage supply on the board. So that means here all the different voltage regulators, and you have seen we have tested here our reset pulse, and I have also tested here the oscillator. Oscillator is also working fine. I have tested that we have traffic here between our EEPROM and the MCU, so that is all just fine, no problem. So at that point I was quite confident that really everything with power distribution is just fine. Then going to the panel unit, and of course we have here the panel unit CPU, which is of course this IC here, and it was exactly the same. I tested here the reset pulse as we have done it, and as I have explained it with the main MCU, and therefore the reset here is fine as well. And as well, what we have tested is here our oscillator. So oscillator is working just fine. So you see everything works perfect, and as well, and that is then given here. Our 5 volt regulator is also working fine, and no problem whatsoever. But what I recognize is that there is not really traffic here on our serial line. So let's enlarge it a little bit more. So you see we have here RX and we have here TX. So that is a serial data line between here our panel unit and finally our main unit. And I have recognized that there is no traffic. And therefore I went back to our main unit, and on the main unit, which is now here in our view, we have of course again our TX and RX pins. So you see that pin 19 and 20 here at our main MCU has as well this serial data lines, of course, so it is needed to get the communication between main and front or panel processor. And I was not able to see the traffic. So normally our main processor starts communicating to the panel, and then the panel answers. And what I have seen is that there was very limited activity here on our TX line, okay? And I couldn't see any reaction on the RX line. And now you are really coming to a point where it gets critical, because we have seen that we have here data and clock line from our EEPROM was just fine, and that you really now at a point where you could conclude, is there maybe the main or the front panel processor somewhat faulty? So now you're really at a point, you do not really know. And then, of course, we have here our wiring between main unit and the front panel. And of course, this wiring is always an issue, and therefore I tested once again if there is continuity between main unit and front panel, and I was definitely sure that here our wiring is just fine. And we even tested it with a short wire, and it was the same problem. So I was absolutely sure that there is definitely no issue with our wiring here between main and front panel, right? So, and again, I really thought, do we have now here really an issue on our MCU? But I thought, this all is already a little bit odd, and as I told you, I have seen that the main processor just tried to send an information to the front panel MCU, but the data looked like a little bit funny, and therefore I thought maybe